welcome back to Coaching with the Bible. This is episode 108. Portion this week, Haazinu, the second to last in the book of Deuteronomy. Season 2, episode 54. Our topic this week, compounding impact. Do not adjust your listening devices. This is my voice for this week. Busy week with the holidays and having the opportunity to lead the prayer services for part of Yom Kippur has left me with this raspy version of my voice. So no singing for me the next few days and no loud talking for me for the next few days. And this is how I sound. So forgive me, but allow me to continue here with Coaching with the Bible for this week, the second to last in the book of Deuteronomy, which means that next week we will complete our second cycle through the book, through the 5 books of Moses, which is quite an accomplishment for, I think, all of us, and really amazing thing. A word of note with respect to Coaching with the Bible, we will be continuing Coaching with the Bible into Season 3 with the following caveat, which is this. Spent a lot of time over the last number of weeks thinking about how does this go forward? How do we continue? What ideas haven't we discussed in 180 episodes? And where do we go from here? And so what I've been thinking about is the following. I realize that the week-to-week use, the benefit of the reading of the Bible week to week in our community allows me to have structure for Coaching with the Bible, which is a great benefit for me because without structure, I don't actually thrive particularly well, some sort of a loose structure. At the same time, I found that to a degree that the week-to-week I felt holding me back a little bit in terms of the ability to discuss wider topics that don't necessarily appear in the 5 books of Moses, but do appear in other places in the Bible or in the corpus of Judaic thought and Torah thought and Bible thought. So what I decided to sort of do is expand the base of content and keep the basic structure. So we'll go week to week, but we may not necessarily be in the portion of the Bible week to week. We may be focusing in on a specific leader and taking away a set of lessons from a particular leader. We may go inside a specific episode and moment and sort of view it from multiple perspectives of that person. We may pick up on a comment in the Talmud or in Mishnaic literature or somewhere else that gives us the opportunity to really explore an idea over 1 week or maybe over a couple of weeks. And so we'll have the regularity and the habituation and the ritualization to a degree of the podcast week to week, but an expanded base of content to be able to actually discuss, which I'm excited about and looking forward to. Okay. That brings us to this week's, because this week's is the first one in that space. Compounding impact. In 1790, Benjamin Franklin put aside $4,400 or 1,000 pounds, $4,400 in a trust, one for the city of Boston and an additional one for the same amount of money for the city of Philadelphia. The idea that the monies could not be extracted other than for very particular use of lending out to merchants, to business people at the time, to be left in trust for 200 years. That was the idea. The backstory was that it had been as the result of a joke or a mockery of America, an American spirit, and American optimism by a French mathematician who mocked Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac and talked about this idea it would be crazy for someone to do this. And Franklin wrote back and said, you know what, it's a great idea, I'm going to do it. And so he then did that. As a result, when the monies came out some 200 years later in 1991, so I think it resulted somewhere around $2.5 million for Philadelphia and $5 million for Boston. And had they really left it untouched, or had they followed the rules of Charlie Munger, who was Warren Buffett's investment partner, and had they not interrupted the compounding unnecessarily, meaning in their case they had the right, but had they sort of left it, it would have been worth so much more money. It's one of the great examples of compounding interest. It is known as the American experiment. It definitely shed light on the idea of optimism about what was to be with the republic known as the United States of America, which Franklin was a founder of. And it certainly is at the root of Franklin's very famous quote, "Money makes money, and the money that makes money makes money." Compounding interest. It's a very powerful topic, very interesting concept. Our ability to think about compounding anything is not obvious and not easy, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. So it came up recently in a book they just completed, which I recommend. If you're interested in money, if you think about money, if you want to think differently about money, you want to change your mindset around money or around investing, so there's a really terrific book called The Psychology of Money. And in that book, it talks extensively about the concept of compounding interest, particularly as it relates to Warren Buffett and his investment. And his greatest investment strategy was probably putting money in and just leaving it there for extended periods of time. And then by virtue of leaving it there for extended periods of time, he accumulated an enormous amount of wealth. I don't speak about it for the purpose of the money. I want to shift it and think about compounding impact. The ability to appreciate or see impact over the long haul. When I work with a leader, whether that's a nonprofit leader who's trying to raise money or that's privately with an individual speaking to somebody, and we do what I call is sort of the business case for making the change that they need to change. So I'll admit that rarely is the subject of compounding impact one of the benefits or the positives that's based inside how they think. So we're gonna do the business case plus doing something or against doing something. And the idea of compounding the results or the impact of that action don't always fit into that kind of an idea. We do talk about momentum, that one thing does lead to another. We will talk about, stacking behaviors like we've talked about before with James Clear in Atomic Habits, the idea of stacking habits, how one thing will lead to the next thing. But the idea that one act and the compounding impact of that one act or that one connection over the course of time is not something that we necessarily think about. This also came up with respect to last week's discussion here in Coaching with the Bible around lasting impressions, appreciating really how far the impression some people make on us or moments have with respect to us and how that sort of plays itself out all the way forward. We have this concept in the Bible, more so in the expanded literature. This is why I'm talking about it. It doesn't so much come up in this week's portion of Haazinu, but it does come up in the context of Mishnaic literature, the concept in the Ethics of the Fathers of what's called in Hebrew mitzvah goreret mitzvah, that one good deed leads to another good deed or brings along another good deed. That's more about momentum. But we do have this concept of the idea that my act now has long-lasting impact later on in the future. So there's an example famously in the Bible that when Jacob steals the blessing, let's say, from Esau, from his brother, the Bible tells us that Esau cries out. And then in exegetical literature, they tell us in that midrash that years later, the impact of that is paid back on Jacob's children through the personality known as Haman in the story of Esther in Purim. And so there's this compounding impact, and then the compounding return or the reverberation of that action that comes back potentially for good or for bad. And it's what we have to think about. Many years ago, I gave a talk on the subject of compounding interest or compounding impact, and I quoted from a book known as Chovot HaLevavot, The Duties of the Heart, by Rabbeinu Bachya, who is 11th century Spain. And in there, he talks about the opportunity for a person to really work on themselves and perfect themselves versus working with others and helping others at their own expense so they come out less, quote unquote, in the long term for having helped others. And when you have that choice, he writes, that you should choose the latter of helping the others versus simply focusing and helping yourself. Why? Because he develops this idea similar to compounding interest, of compounding merit or compounding impact, which is if you think about it, you're helping yourself. So let's say you get 25% better. Great. But if you help 10 people, and they help 10 people, and they help 10 people, so you benefit from each and every single one of those actions forward. So there's a compounding nature, it's a compounding interest that accrues back to you for having helped those people. It's an amazing sort of thing. So it's sort of what plays out from the good deed that you do or the bad that you do over the course of time. And so this came up for me this week specifically, and it's an incredible moment. Having led the services this week in our synagogue here, in what I would say is a small town in the center of Israel. Some people know of it, a lot of people don't. So the idea that people randomly sort of come your way, it does happen. But the event that happened this week was that my first grade Judaic studies teacher happened to be here for the holiday. She doesn't live here. Her name is Morabina. I don't even remember her last name, but she went by Morabina. The teacher, her name is Bina, and she was here for the holiday by a cousin of hers, happened to be in the same synagogue, happened to be in the same service, and happened to be there in the service that I was leading. She was my first grade teacher 40 years ago. And so when I thought about it afterward, and she mentioned it just jokingly, but it's really true, she taught me how to read Hebrew. So play that forward over the course of 39 years. The compounded impact of the act and the time and the effort that she put into me as an okay student in first grade, and how that plays out over time. So over the course of time, I've had the honor and the pleasure to give many talks, to lead a lot of prayer services, to give a lot of classes and to teach a lot of students in a lot of places, a lot of Bible and a lot of Talmud and all these different things. And it's all predicated on the idea that I can read and speak and understand the Hebrew language. And that all goes back to that one person who was my first grade teacher who taught me how to do that. Now, she didn't teach me all of it, obviously, but she gave me the kernel, she gave me the root, she gave me the base. And so when you think about how much of, like, if people are coming over and thanking me for a talk or enjoyed a class that I gave, or maybe enjoyed the services that I led, whatever it may be, I get some credit for it, I get some benefit for it, but she gets a lot of it too. And so when I thought about it more, this incredible notion of compounded impact should be a larger player and feature far greater in how we conceptualize and how we think about the business case for anything that we're going to do, good or bad. Not so much the idea of how much is going to accrue to me and how much do I get. That's not the idea. The idea is on the other side of that. So what's the compounded impact of this act? How far forward can I think about what I'm doing here? 1, 2, 3 generations. Can we think about that? Can we think about what's going down? So in certain parts of the world with certain things, we talk about thinking, next generation. People start to think about, there was a movement in the climate change space that the name of the organization is something to do specifically about next generation. There was a cleaning supplies company a number of years ago that had the name similarly that related to the idea that it was about next generation. They wanted to focus it on the compounded impact, the future impact of the actions from now. And so it's important that as we think about these things, we start to put this stuff together, that we're able to develop the momentum of it, because I think that's important, but also the conceptualization of it and then the implementation of it. So here's an example. When we're thinking about starting a certain behavior, let's say it's physical health. I'll leave the money out because it's not an area where I can actually have any provide any help per se. But if we want to, let's talk about physical activity or reading and learning and studying, right? So there is the impact that it has on us. So the action, let's say we decide to read, as I said last week, talk about 20 books a year, 100 ideas a year. We like to study a few hours a day, let's say 1 or 2 hours a day. So it's the direct impact that it has on us. And then there's what you might think is indirect impact on everyone around you, family members, friends, acquaintances, network, whatever it is, that network effect as well. And when we're thinking about yay or nay, doing it or not doing it, we should consider to some degree the larger impact that action would make. Because if it's good, then why wouldn't we want to do that? Why wouldn't we want to know the fullest extent of the impact that we could have on the world by virtue of one act, let alone 10 acts, let alone 100 acts, let alone one person, 10 people, 100 people? That's why for me, when I talk about impact, so impact is one of my key drivers in life, is one of the things that I think about a lot, is how much impact, how can I have more impact? Again, it's not for the idea of publicity or awareness about me. It's really not. It's just sort of what drives me. It's what's interesting to me. It's what moves me and gets me thinking about certain ideas, certain opportunities, certain things that maybe present themselves to me, is compounded impact, is this notion, this idea. And so something I want you to think about as the year begins, as we're coming into the year and we're starting and we're setting out our goal sets for the coming year, we're writing down what it is we want to accomplish in the year. We're going, chapter by chapter, month by month, value by value, however we want to set those things up. And as I said, we'll talk more about goals as we get through it. But here at the outset, when we're coaching it and we're working on ourselves and we're coaching ourselves here and we're trying to build ourselves and trying to get ourselves in a position for better, think about the actions that you're doing now that have compounded impact. Whether it's holiday related, because we're going from the New Year to Yom Kippur to the holiday of Sukkot, the Tabernacle holiday, which begins on Sunday evening. We're going from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. We want to think about the things that compound, the things that build on themselves. So we made the investment. What builds on that first investment? What builds onto that second investment? What builds on top of that? What's the compounding that's going to take place on top of the work that we're doing now, the foundational work we're doing now? What's the foundational thing we're doing now that's really changing us at our core? And then what's the compounding action of impact that goes on top of that? So in the space of exercise, right, it would be, okay, I'm starting to walk every day. The compounding impact item on top of that might be lifting weights. That compounds the effort, that compounds the results, that compounds the merit, that compounds the accomplishment. All those are euphemisms or other words for the interest, for the original investment that's made. And then the third one on top of that second one. So it's some form of, stacking that's taking place, but it's all built on that original action that's happening. So we think about it with respect to people. We can think about it today in the following way. We can talk about it with respect to finances and people with their money and compounding interest. You definitely don't need me for that. You don't need me necessarily for anything, but you definitely don't need me for that. But when we're talking about how we're able to improve and build and grow and develop who we are as individuals and to learn as individuals to be better this year than last year. So we're building on foundations that we built last year. Let's think about what was the foundation that we laid last year that we're building on now. What's the action that we're building on now that's compounding off of last year? Or if it's over the course of many years. Or the opposite. Let's take a minute to think about the opposite and then we'll stop. Compounding interest on debt or compounding interest on, negative behavior is equally as devastating in parallel to compounding interest on the good behavior, on the good investment, let's say. And so let's think about that. We can put a pause to it. We can stop it. It's not easy, but we can do it. And then flip it over. And now we're working on the other side of that. And so these are the things that I want you to think about. These are things that we should be thinking about right now at this time of the year is all of those conceptions about compounding impact, about the people who maybe we've impacted, the people who have had impact on us, the events that have had a compounding impact effect on us over the course of the short term and the long term, and then how we operate towards the future when we think about what it is that we want to do going into the year that has literally just begun only just a few days ago. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. I look forward to seeing you next week as we close out the 5 books of Moses for the second time, and hopefully by then have a little bit of voice back to talk better with you. Have a great weekend. Those of you celebrating starting on Sunday evening, happy holidays to you.